everyone. I have Randi-Lee Bowslaugh today. Hello, Randy. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. How's your 2021 been?
So far, so good. Yeah, better than 2020, I guess.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So you're doing amazing things and you've written multiple books and you're doing great things, raising awareness about mental health, about autism, and doing wonderful work. And we would all love to hear that. But before we get into that, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself and where you're from and what you do?
I can definitely, I'll try to give you the real condensed version. I live in Ontario, Canada, and pretty close to the border, actually. So a lot of people go, you don't sound Canadian, but I am, surprise. I've got 2 kids and a grandbaby. Been married for almost 9 years. In like 2 months, it'll be 9 years. Yeah, like you said, I've been writing a lot of books. I'm also a personal trainer, a kickboxer. I've competed internationally for kickboxing on Team Canada. I've got 2 dogs and 4 cats, who I love. And yeah, that's the super quick version. I'm sure there's so much more that I could say, but then we might be here forever.
Oh, you love that. I love the fact that you're a kickboxer. How's that like? Is it really
It,
tiring?
yes. I mean, not right now, because right now we can't do anything. We can't train,
Yeah.
but it can be very tiring. It's probably the best workout I've ever had. There's nothing quite the same as hitting people, but they know it's coming. It's not like I'm just walking around on the street doing it.
Oh, okay. That made it more fun. Like that
Yeah,
would be
yeah.
more fun. But that's wonderful that you're doing so many amazing things. And I want to talk about your works with mental health and to understand your journey and what you've been through and how you're helping people. So you talked about depression and how you've been suffering. You suffered with depression when you were a kid, but you didn't really know what you were suffering with because obviously the talks about mental health now has been less stigmatized now, and we're able to talk about it more freely. But like even few years back, it wasn't as casual as it now. So when did you realize that you were suffering with depression, and when did it start?
I realized it as a teenager, probably around 14, 15, something like that. I realized it. But it probably started when I was younger. When I was little, though, like say elementary school age, I don't remember too many times of being really upset other than when I was being picked on.
Mm.
Those times got pretty bad. So up until grade 5, I didn't really have anything really bad in my life, I guess. Everything was just, as a kid, you think everything is great. In grade 5, there was a new girl that came to my school. She wasn't very nice to me. And that was
Mm.
the first time that I had really experienced the world is not roses and everything's good. There's hard stuff in the world, too. And then from there, I went to another school that was a little bit bigger for grade 7, 8. And I learned that I was poor, which I didn't know before. Because I mean, and as a parent now, I realize, it's not something you tell your kids. You're not like, oh, guess what, guys? I don't know if we can pay electricity or if we can
Oh,
eat this
God.
month, right? And but I didn't realize that there was always a roof over my head, clothes on my body, like whatever. But then I came to realize that shopping at secondhand stores and stuff, that wasn't cool.
Mm.
Um, Now, though, I think times have really changed and people being more conscious about the earth and things is
Mm.
people want to shop secondhand now
Yes.
because it's so good. And I still love going to the thrift stores and looking for stuff. But from that, it just made me really hate school. And
Mm.
up to grade 5, I had loved school. I had been on every sports team, every club. It was great. And then I really started to hate school because I didn't feel like I fit in. I didn't feel like people cared about me. I just felt awful. So in high school, I skipped a lot. Don't do that, children.
Yeah.
Talk to your parents about it. And it was easier for me to skip school, do my work at home, than to have to try and put on a brave face and go to school. Hiding behind a smile it's not easy to do every single day, and it was too hard. So I skipped school. My mom found out. I got in just a little bit of trouble. And but then she said, she goes, all right, if you're not going to go to school, because ultimately when I was 14, 15 years old, my mom had to go to work. She didn't drive at the time either, so it's not like she could even drop me off at school. I had to take the bus. She left for work before me. She couldn't make sure I actually got there. She was relying on me to be, kind of, not a grown-up, but a teenager, right? Like, be responsible for myself. So she said, all right, if you're going to skip, 2 things. You have to stay home so I know you're safe, and you have to do all your schoolwork. You cannot fail. Okay, well, that's an easy deal. I'll do it. So I did that. During that time, that's when I got into writing. I wrote a lot of poetry to help me deal with all of those depressive moments. So my poetry is very dark. It tackles a lot of concepts about cutting, about suicidal ideation, about running away, all that kind of really upsetting information that I was hiding from people at the time, because I didn't want people to think that I was weak, that people would, back then, they would say things like, because in the hallways at school, you'd hear other people being picked on, whatever, and you'd hear things like, oh, your life isn't so bad. What do you have to complain about? But you don't know what my life is. You don't know that I'm going home to an alcoholic stepfather. You don't know that I feel out of place. You don't know any of the thoughts that are going through my head right now. So you can't tell me how I feel. And with depression, I mean, sometimes it hits you and you don't have a reason. There's definitely been times in my adult life, because my adult life, I mean, there's hardships for sure with autism for my child and things, but ultimately, I'd say I have a pretty good adult life. I have a loving husband. My kids are, for the most part, good. They're kids. And I'm following my passions. So for the most part, I'm going to say I have a great adult life, but there's definitely times that I've been in a depressed state and I can't pull myself out of bed. I want to sit in my bed, eat a tub of ice cream, and just hide away from the world. So,
do you ever talk about your depression to your friends and family, and how do they react to that?
Now it's an open conversation. Everybody knows now. But as a teenager, and even as a young adult, I didn't. I felt weak. So one of my biggest things that I had to overcome with embracing my mental health was that mental health doesn't make you weak. But that is what my brain kept telling me. I needed to be everything for everyone all the time. I had to be the mom. I had to be the good wife. I had to be a good employee. And at the time I was in social services as an employment counselor. So I had to do all of this stuff for everybody else that I couldn't tell them what I was thinking. I couldn't tell them that on my drive to work, I was thinking about driving off a bridge because that would make me weak. And then I couldn't do what everyone else needed me to do. Now it's like, yeah, I'm having a bad day. You need to leave me alone. Or I'm having a bad day. I need you to come over here and give me a hug.
And I'm pretty sure once you open up about it and talk about it, it gets a lot more easier than when you're figuring it out and finding it, like trying to find out why you feel this way. And that initial feeling can be really daunting to because you don't know really what's happening. And so how did you deal with that, trying to figure out why you were feeling this way?
I'm not sure if there was ever a real cut and dry route that I took to do that. It was just sort of a part of my life. And as I grew and got in, I'm going to say, I guess, when I was in college, I took a lot of psychology classes because it was part of my program. And then I went to university and took a lot of psychology. I didn't finish my bachelor's because then I said, I'm out of social services. I can't do it no more. I'm going to be a personal trainer. So I was like, I'm not getting into more debt for this. But I had taken nearly my entire bachelor's of psychology. And I think that really helped me to understand it without me realizing that I was coming to understand myself. And the biggest thing, so talking to my friends and most of my family has been really easy now because I have a better way of describing it to them. I'd say the biggest, or not really the hardest person to talk to about it is still my mom. She knows about it. She knows about all the books I've written about it. And I just think it's hard for her to wrap her head around how she could have missed it. So she still doesn't fully want to believe it, I think.
Yeah, it can be really tough, but at the same time, I feel like it's not anyone's responsibility to know. It can be easily covered up. There's so many ways that can pretend like you're okay. So I don't think it's anybody's fault at the end of the day. It's really up to you to understand how you're feeling and to communicate that. And as a teenager, that can be tough because as everything else is going around. And
oh, I know. And you just think, oh, they're teenagers, they're just being moody. It's fine.
Exactly. Because you don't know if that's like the normal phase of what they're going through or if it's actually something wrong. So it can be really difficult. And that is the thing. Like, so how do you think that nowadays, like, because there's so many other distractions that we can fall into, and it can, I feel like depression is something that everybody deals with it differently, and there isn't a one size fits all. Some people like to prefer medication. Some people prefer doing other things like working out and other forms of natural ways so they don't have to go to medication. Or some people prefer therapy. There's so many different options. But what worked for you? And do you feel like depression is an up and down cycle rather than like you cure it and that's it?
Oh, that is a great question. I love the way you word that. And I think my story will really give you a good understanding of that one. So at the beginning of me trying to deal with my depression, because at first it was just hide it. But when I came to the point that I needed to, I guess, come clean with myself, the first person I talked to was my husband. And he was like, okay, so go talk to your doctor, like go do what you got to do. Right? I'm here for you, but go do what you got to do. I can't do it for you. And so I went to my family doctor first. And the first thing that he did was actually write me off of work at first. So I took a medical leave of absence from work for 12 weeks. And at that time, we were playing around with medication with some antidepressants, which once we got the right dosage, worked fabulously. Oh, great. But they're not something that you should only rely on. So at first, I'm taking that and it's making me feel better. And then once I'm starting to feel better, then I was able to then learn other coping strategies. Because when you're in that state of being depressed, you can't really understand what you should do. You might know it in your head. Like I said, I took a lot of psychology courses. I was in social services. I was telling people how to deal with stuff, but I couldn't do it myself because just because my head knows it doesn't mean my body or my heart is going to do it. So the medication helped me to kind of pull myself out of that so that I could utilize strategies and learn new strategies. So during that time off, I was able to go to therapy as well and learn some strategies there. I did cognitive behavioral therapy and I also did dialectical behavior therapy. And went back to work part-time, still seeing the therapist, worked as an employment counselor for, I'm not sure, maybe 6 more months or so. And it was just getting so hard still to deal with the social services side. And I was lucky enough that I transferred into another division. I went into data management there. And I did that for a while. And it was going all right, but it was still really, really hard. To function with that. And then there was a lot going on with my youngest because we were going through figuring out the diagnosis for autism at that time as well. So eventually I took another leave of absence from work. And that time I didn't go back. That was, I guess, 3 years ago now. Oh, almost 4 years ago now, I guess. And I didn't go back after that time because that's when I decided I can't do this anymore. I'm changing my whole career. I'm going to be a personal trainer. And at that time, when I was doing personal training and fitness classes, I was working out a lot more, which again, you had mentioned as a coping strategy, and it works great because it releases our endorphins, which are our happy hormones. And I felt great. So I'd be working out probably 2 or 3 times a day, depending on who I had and what classes I was teaching. And then of course, doing my own workout. And it was great. And I felt elated all the time. And I went, oh, you know what? I'm going to get off my medication. I'm done with it. Didn't talk to a doctor about it, which is not a good idea. You should never ever come off of something like that by yourself. But I was just in this euphoric state of a whole new life that I was like, nah, I'm done. And what I realized coming off of it, and this is what you're talking about with, is it cyclical, is that after I came off of it, it was really hard to constantly stay up. I would have to work out 5 to 6 times a day to keep that same kind of level as what the antidepressants did. And it's just not realistic for me. I can't be constantly working out. It doesn't work with
5 to 6
life.
times is insane.
No, exactly. So I did actually last year, I struggled with it for a long time because I was really in that mindset of I don't want to be on medication for the rest of my life. It, again, going back to that mindset of if I'm on medication forever, I'm weak. I didn't even tell my husband I went off of it. That's how ashamed of it I was. And then last year, just before COVID shut everything down, actually, we were walking the dogs and I said to my husband, I know I'm really feeling bad again. Like I'm really depressed again. I'm considering again jumping off a bridge. And where I live, there are a lot of them. That's why it was kind of my go-to because within 5 minutes of my house, there's at least 2 bridges in either direction. So it's not good. And he looked at me, he goes, when did you go off your meds? Because he didn't know. He was so mad at me for doing it because I shouldn't have, right? Especially without consulting a doctor.
Yes.
And he's diabetic and he takes insulin every single day. And he goes, well, do you want me to stop taking my insulin? No. He goes, well, there you go. Okay. So I went back to my doctor I just said, I need them again. So he put me back on them. And I don't plan on going back off of them because I now have experienced what it's like back off of them. But when you're in that mindset, I feel like a normal person. I feel like don't need them anymore. And I can just live my life the way everybody else lives their life who isn't on medication, who doesn't have mental health. But then I had to come to the realization that I have mental health and it's just a part of me. It doesn't need to run my life, but I also can't forget about it.
And I feel like everybody deals with it differently. So there isn't anything wrong taking medication, although there's a huge kind of backlash on medication itself because there are a lot of side effects and it affects people differently. So it's really on what works for you and what doesn't. And for some people, medication makes them feel even worse than they did before. But some people it works great. So I feel like there isn't a one-cut solution. And you can often hear people say that, oh, if you're depressed, you just have to get out of bed and work out and eat healthy and you'll be fine. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works. Everybody goes through it differently. For some people that works great for them. Okay, cool. But there isn't nothing wrong with people who rely on medications because they need that. And at the end of the day, depression can be caused by many different reasons. And for some people, it's just a chemical imbalance. So I feel like, do you feel like society itself has made taking medication for any mental illnesses a bad thing?
I think it definitely started that way. I'm starting to see a shift because more of us are speaking out about it, but it really is seen as a weakness. And a lot of people still think that mental health isn't true. So if it's not true, why do you need medication, right? You're just using that for sympathy from other people. But obviously that's not the case. Like you said, a lot of people, if you're taking medication all the time, like I do every single day, it is a chemical imbalance. My brain is not releasing the right amount of hormones that I need in order to function at a level that is deemed socially appropriate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. And it's very important to take care of yourself in the best way that fits you. And I think that's the most important thing. And coming back to the point of you had to deal with your child being autistic, how was that like? Were you aware of what autism was at that time, and how did he get diagnosed?
That is such a hard, long story. I'm going to give you a condensed version. That's actually my entire second book is all about that, because it is such a huge topic. So I was like, no, I'm going to write a whole book about it. Mm-hmm. So we always knew there was something a little off about him, but we didn't know what it was. And especially, so I do have two, but the older one is actually my stepdaughter. Mm-hmm. And she didn't move in with us until she was 12. And then our youngest would have been 9. Mm-hmm. So really, I didn't have a lot to compare it to. Mm-hmm. Right? When I had when I gave birth to my child, and then I got together with my husband 6 months later, his daughter was already 3. Mm-hmm. So from 0 to 3, I just thought anything that he did was normal because I had nothing to compare it to. And then we just thought everything was kind of normal because we had nothing to compare it to. Mm-hmm. However, as he started to get older and started to make friends in like daycare and kindergarten, it was very clear that something was different. And the way that he was communicating was very clear something was different, because comparing a 3-year-old talking to my child's 3-year-old talking, there was something off, right? And as he got older, it was just becoming more and more clear. And so we started to go through the process of figuring out what that was. The first thing they said was it was ADHD. Mm-hmm. And he went on ADHD meds. And actually when you mentioned some meds can make people worse, mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw that in full effect. They put him on bifenton, which is an ADHD med, and it was awful. He completely regressed. It was shutting down, was angry all the time. He'd be like, hey, how's it going? And he would literally hiss at you. He'd just be like,
oh, wow.
So it didn't work at all. And then we kept watching. I had to get the teacher and the daycare to write notes to the doctor about what they were seeing. And it became clear finally at the age of 8 that it was autism.
Mm-hmm. How was your initial feeling when he was diagnosed? Did you have enough knowledge on autism? Did you feel like there was something majorly wrong, like people believe?
By the time he finally got diagnosed, I had done a lot of research, because at first when they said ADHD, I started doing a lot of research on ADHD. And again, because I had taken a lot of psychology in school, I learned a little bit. I mean, I'm not a doctor, and I wasn't even on the route to be a doctor, but we still touched on the subjects of it. Mm-hmm. And ADHD and autism, they have a lot of similar symptoms. Mm-hmm. So as I'm looking at ADHD, they're coming up with symptoms of autism and comparing lists and stuff. So I had learned a lot just doing all that research. Mm-hmm. And when they finally gave that diagnosis, me and my husband were actually both really happy, because it was a reason. There was a reason why there was meltdowns. There was a reason why he wasn't functioning well in school. There was a reason why he wasn't talking the same way other kids were talking.
Mm. What were the differences that how he was acting than the kids his age, how they were acting?
Yeah, that was the actually biggest clue. So by the time you're in grade 3, you're 8 years old, you should be playing with other kids, interacting with them, playing make-believe games together. Mm-hmm. What mine would do is at recess time, he would go out and play beside the other kids while they were playing. And he was totally content with that. It wasn't like he was being left out. That was a choice that he was making. He was content to go out of recess, play in his own little world, and didn't really matter what everybody else was doing. So that was more like, it's called parallel playing. And that's more like what a 3-year-old would do, not a grade 3 at 8. So that was a really big clue. The other big clue is a big speech delay. Now, my kid talkative. He will talk your ear off. He's 14 now. Talk your ear off does not mean you're going to understand a darn thing he says. So that was a big thing. He did go to speech therapy. It got better, but it's still, I mean, it's still very far behind what other kids have at 14 now. But at least I feel blessed because at least he can talk to me and say, I love you, Mom, and that kind of thing. And then just being in his own world was a really big clue because he wouldn't interact with the world like, and I don't like to say normal person, but he wouldn't really interact in the world in a typical fashion.
And how did the teachers deal with that? Did they feel like
they didn't? They just sent him home over and over and over. They would call me at work and say, he's having a meltdown. We can't handle him. You need to come pick him up. The one time I went to pick him up, they had also called the ambulance because he was having a huge meltdown. And let me explain meltdowns for you.
Right, yes.
Because a lot of people have a misunderstanding of what an autism meltdown is. A lot of people compare it to what a temper tantrum is, and they are completely different. So a temper tantrum is a child wants something and you've said no. So they're going to cry, whine, stomp their feet because they want it, but you've said no. There's a reason. A meltdown, there isn't a reason that we can understand from the outside. It's a very internalized reason. So it could be, and for my kid, it was too many people were around. It's not something we ever figured out for the longest time until he was old enough to really talk about it. If there was loud noises, if he had sensory issues with clothing. So there was just different things that you couldn't understand from the outside looking in because it was all an internalized emotional response that he couldn't cope with what was going on. He didn't have those skills. So he would have a meltdown. The meltdown, he's a violent meltdown. So that's something that a lot of people don't want to talk about. They want to, society in general wants to hide that part under the covers. They want to talk about kids with autism that are just brilliant and are, Rain Man type stuff. But violent meltdowns are a part of a lot of people with autism's lives. So this one meltdown in particular, I showed up at the school and like I said, they had called the ambulance, and actually for whatever reason, my husband also felt the need to come because we would always call each other and say, hey, I got to pick him up. And he just had this thing that was telling him, you got to go too today. So my kid, he was in the room, in the sensory room at this school, and all the teachers and stuff were on the outside, and they had shut the door, and they were just looking at him through the window because they were scared for their safety at this point. And I'm like, okay, you guys are way bigger than he is. And like, I get that he's throwing things. I get that he's hitting. I get that he's screaming. But you're leaving him in a room all by himself. Like, that's not safe for him. And he totally destroyed the room. Anything he could get his hands on, he would just grab it and throw it, and it was everywhere. Ended up going to the hospital. We stayed in the hospital for a couple days that time. And there was a lot of those moments. There was a lot of times when I'd be called at work and have to go and pick him up from school. We actually counted the other day how many schools he had been to, and he's been to 9 different schools.
Wow.
Because as soon as the school couldn't handle him, they'd say, oh, go to this school. It's a better program. Go there. And off he went. Oh, no, this one's going to work better because he's not functioning well. And that doesn't help because people with autism, routine is so important. And all they kept doing was changing routine and expecting a different result. That was crazy. It didn't make sense to me. And at one point, actually, in grade 6, we homeschooled.
Oh, okay. How was that?
He learned a lot. It worked out really, really well for him. Definitely stressful for me because I had no idea what the heck I was doing. But there's so many resources out there, tons of Facebook groups that really helped me learn how to go about finding work and stuff for him. And then in grade 7, he went to a treatment facility for 3 months. So by that time, we had multiple meltdowns. We had to call the police, come to our house numerous times. Like, I couldn't even tell you how many times we had the cops come because the meltdowns were so intense. And by then he was almost the same size as me. So there wasn't a lot I could do. I couldn't restrain him anymore. It didn't work. And coping strategies only work when you're in a place to use them, when you're in the proper mindset that you can use them. They're not going to work when your emotional capacity has just exploded. So I've been chased with knives. There's holes in the walls from him finding a hammer and banging it. We've been to the hospital on suicide watch. He's tried to kill himself so many times. It breaks my heart. We have a safe in the kitchen now where we've had to put knives and our medications in the safe because of cutting. And he actually, one of the suicide attempts, he actually took half of my bottle of antidepressants. And we had to take him to the hospital, and he had to drink the charcoal. And he went to our children's hospital, stayed there for a week. And so I was like, hey, well, I guess we can't have these anywhere. Not that they were on the counter, they were still put away, but he knew where they were. He was, I think, 9 at the time. So I go, oh, these have got to go in the safe now. Like, we have to make sure everything is locked up. And even with everything locked up, he'd still try to hang himself with like a belt. So it's very hard. And then dealing with my own depression and trying to do that, all my brain kept saying was, you're a horrible mom. How could you let this happen? What is wrong with you that you can't do this? And that was hard too, but he's doing amazing now. And actually, as much as people didn't like that the school shut down last year, that was a blessing for our house, because we have learned that doing it online is the absolute best way for him to succeed. So, I got to see the good in things.
That's great. I mean, I know for a fact it was really difficult for you, and the initial stages couldn't have been any easier, figuring out what was going on. And I feel like as a mother itself, you would want to do as much as you can to help, but at the same time, there's only so much you can do to help. And what was it like telling your friends and family that this was a situation, and how did you deal with the meltdowns at school? Did you feel did you feel like it was just too much to handle at certain times?
Telling our family was really easy. Actually, there was no hiding it. Like I said, it was more like, finally there's a reason. So when he'd have a meltdown, say at like Christmas or something, right? Because you have everybody over, it made more sense. And we were able to be like, guys, he needs a break. Don't bug him, right? So that was actually a good thing for us in telling our family and our friends. And a lot of my friends now, I mean, their kids all have autism. You start to find other people in similar situations. When it comes to the school and meltdowns, I'm just frustrated with our school system and how poorly they handle these situations. They were not very good. And it's not to say all of them, but it really depended on the teacher. And out of all the teachers that he's had, he's in grade 9 now, and I'm going to say he had 3 good teachers. So that's not a lot. 4 if you include me. But a lot of them, they wanted to wash their hands of him and not have to deal with it. So it wasn't good. And because they just didn't want to, is what it felt like. Some of them did. Like I said, there was a handful of really good ones that really tried to help. Actually, last year's teacher was my favorite teacher that he's ever had. And actually, every so often I'll shoot her an email and tell her how awesome he's doing now, because she was amazing. She took the time. She never made it feel like she didn't want him in the class. Not that she always sent the work home. Even before COVID hit, she would send it home, or we would email back and forth, and she'd say, hey, here's the worksheets if he's not making it today. And it was really good. She was very accommodating, and I just wish more teachers would do that as well. So that was hard, because the schools didn't really want to deal with it, and that's one of the big reasons that he went to the treatment facility. So the treatment facility is actually, so it's in London, Ontario, and they stay there Monday to Friday. Well, Sunday night to Friday. And then you go up, you pick them up, you take them home from Friday to Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a really tough decision to say, yeah, he's got to go to a treatment facility. But we were at the point we didn't know what to do anymore. Like, we were crying all the time because I had no idea what to do. The meltdowns were insane. The fact that he was trying to kill himself constantly. So you're on red alert all the time. Sleep is a huge issue. He would be up all night, sleep all day, and the cycle would just be really hard. We've learned that the cycle has a lot to do with hormones, which is nice, that we've learned that. But so I would barely be getting any sleep at night. I would be sleeping on the couch, so I would be right in front of his bedroom door to make sure if I heard it that I'd be up. So it was very tough. And actually that year I had cancer, so that just sort of piled on top of everything else, that it's like, hey, I'm about to have surgery, and then after surgery, I mean, he's really a sweet, caring kid. He really is. Like, when I had my surgery, he took care of me. He'd be like, Mom, do you need some water? And I'll go get it. But when the meltdown would happen, and it's totally out of his control, it was very out of control. So it was hard. He did so well going to treatment. They did all of the assessments that the school kept putting off. So like a psychoeducational, they kept telling me, at first it was, well, he's too dysregulated. And then the 1 year he was finally regulated enough, and they go, but he's doing good in school, so we don't need to do it now. Like, but he needs it. So that was really important. They learned that he has a reading and writing disability, which really would have helped had they done it 3 years ago when I asked them to. Because you're asking him to do these assignments that he literally cannot do because of his reading and writing disability. So that was really good. They learned, they got the speech delay diagnosis with the speech therapist. We learned about they did an occupational therapy diagnosis, and we learned that he's got fine motor skill problems, which we never realized before because he's an artist and he draws all the time, constantly. But what we didn't know is that when he was drawing, so most people, when you're writing or you're drawing, you're moving from your wrist. He moves his whole arm when he does it. So it's very tiring, and he's not using all those small, fine muscles in his hand. So that was kind of interesting, something that we never knew. So it was really great that he went there because he got all the assessments that we were missing being here at home. And he was able to talk to a psychologist nearly every day. So he was able to realize that he puts up barriers as well for emotions, and learning what some of those emotions were, because a big problem was that he didn't understand what emotions were. When he was younger, emotions were happy or angry. There wasn't even a sad. You were either happy or you were angry. So now he's learned a lot of other emotions, which is really important as we're growing up.
I want to go to the fact of meltdowns, and how did he deal with meltdowns in public? And was there like a way for you to, like, do you just get out from the situation, or was there a way to control it?
When he was little, I could just pick him up and we could leave. So that was easy. But as he got older, it was a lot harder. Basically, if a meltdown happened, you had to just let it run its course. I couldn't pick him up. Sometimes I would restrain him when he was in between the I can pick you up, but I can't pick you up stage. So I would restrain, and sometimes I'd literally sit on the floor, say like at Walmart, and I'd sit in the middle of the aisleway, and I'd hold him, and we would just sit there, and he would be like throwing his head back, trying to get away from me. And people would walk by and give dirty looks, and I'd be like, what? What? Like, you either need to help me or you need to move on right now. If you need in this aisle, you can't have it. But we came to learn some of the triggers. So like I said, loud noises are triggers. Lots of people are triggers. So Christmas, any kind of holiday, he doesn't go shopping. If we know that we need to go to multiple stores, we would find a babysitter. Now he's old enough. He's very, very mature now. Still has a long way to go, but if we have to go to the grocery store, he can stay home by himself. But we would find a babysitter if we knew that we had to do groceries and go to Walmart and, I don't know, go shopping for shoes, right? If he was coming with us, one store, he could handle that, and that was fine. So just learning those triggers was really important in the long run. And we're still learning different things. Sometimes stuff will still set them off and we're like, what just happened? But it's a learning process.
I mean, that's great that you have finally, found the ways to deal with it, because I know that the initial stages when you don't know what's happening, that can be the most frustrating part. And once you find it out, then it should be fine. Do you feel like society glorifies the good sides of autism? Like for some people who are highly skilled, or in terms of they can have great certain skills, do you feel like society just focuses on that aspect and leaves out the other parts of it?
Yeah, they really do. They focus on, like you said, that part where they're just so skilled at one particular thing. The other one that a lot of people now are talking about are really severe side, where they're nonverbal, which it's really important to talk about, don't get me wrong. But the violent kids, the ones that are left kind of, they're of average intelligence. That's how the doctor said it to me. They're of average intelligence. They can sort of do their schoolwork baseline, but they have violent meltdowns. They still lack proper social skills. But from just looking at them, you wouldn't notice. Those ones are still kind of left behind. They don't want to talk about them.
What about, how does he make friends? Does he have friends? Is that a normal part, like talking to people? Is that difficult for him right now?
It was a really hard thing to learn for him. So for the longest time, he didn't have any friends at school. Birthday parties would be like his cousins coming, because they had no choice. Then we started meeting other parents of kids with autism. And so we started making friends. So he has a couple real life friends. And then a couple of friends that he's met online from playing video games. Those ones he talks to most often, which is really good. And we've talked a lot about internet safety. And I always say, if you're talking to somebody, then I need to listen in on your conversation to make sure. And then once I sort of deem it as like a real friend, just like you would in real life, right? Like a parent wants to meet the friends. So that's what I do. I meet their friends, even if it's just virtually. And then I'm like, okay, cool. You guys go off, play your Minecraft thing. Cool. And actually, we had new neighbors move in last year. They have 2 little girls. So he's been making friends with them, which is nice. So in real life, he has a handful of friends that he can see physically once COVID's done. But he's got a few that he talks to online kind of on a regular basis. But it was a long road to that. He probably didn't have friends until, he started at that one daycare in grade 4. So at grade 4, he met the 2 boys at the daycare, and he became really good friends with them. And then after that, he didn't make any new friends until probably about 2 years ago.
Oh, that's such an improvement from. I feel like school, especially, they need to understand and cater towards kids' needs, because everybody has different needs, and especially the education system as a whole is just towards one style and one style only, and it doesn't fit everybody. Everybody has different needs, and I get that it can be a lot to cater towards each and everyone's needs, but at least to have a special program or to include kids with autism and other people who can't with dyslexia. There's so many things that they need to consider that I feel like is still a long way to go, and it's still 2021, but still the changes haven't been done. I feel like the education system in specific is still like years behind it needs to. And I feel like a lot of, kids could go to school and they can also be a part of the normal system per se, if they would provide the needs and treat them like the way that they have to be treated. I had an amazing time talking to you and learning the world about autism and all the aspects that society usually doesn't think about or talk about, because it's just too stigmatized. Before we end this podcast, do you have anything to share?
I have so much always to share. If anybody wants to find me and talk more or anything like that, I'm on Facebook at RB Writing, and on Instagram at Randi-Lee Writing. So if anybody wants to find me, or I have a website which has like a contact form thing, so you can send an email. It's just rbwriting.ca, and that way, if anybody does wanna catch up or find out more, I'm literally an open book since I have written 3 books about my life. So nothing is really off the table.
That's wonderful. And where can people find your books?
They're all on Amazon. So the easiest way to do it is when you go on Amazon to actually just search my name, Randi-Lee Bowslaugh. And then all of them will come up. Or like I said, on my website, there'll be links to them. And you can do that as well. As well as there's a link on my website to the podcast, the show that I do, and it's mental health awareness.
That's perfect. And this has been great. Thank you so much for joining me today. And it's autism is something that people don't really know much about, and it's still heavily stigmatized. So thank you so much for sharing such wonderful insights about a day-to-day life. And it's been great talking to you.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's been so fun. No problem at all. For everybody who's listening, I will see you all next week.